Hello and welcome to the Green Standard podcast powered by Veriheal, where we talk about all things cannabis, whether that is personal testimonies from medical cannabis patients or experiences from those working in the cannabis industry. Today, we are talking to one of these industry professionals. She is the head of practitioner relationships at Veriheal and one of the drivers of Veriheal culture from the beginning of Veriheal's history up until now. One of my favorite people on the planet to have a conversation with, Baiyina Abdas. So, Baiyina talked to us today about facing the cannabis stigma. She talked about her upbringing and how this upbringing influenced, her own internalized preconceived notions about cannabis and how she kind of deconstructed them over time to become one of the most prominent figures, not only at this company, but in cannabis practitioner relationships across the country. And so every time I talk to Baiyinas, she has a little gem of fascinating info that I had never heard before. And this conversation was no exception. It was such a blast to have her on the show. But before we get into the conversation, if you are wondering if you qualify for your med card, or you think you could benefit from medical cannabis, Veriheal is here to answer any questions you have and also link you with a cannabis doctor in your area to help you start the process of getting your medical cannabis card. So for more information or to start the process, visit veriheal.com. That's Veriheal.com to get started. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining me in room 420.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yes. Can you tell the world who you are and what your role here is at Veriheal?
Absolutely. My name is Baiyina Abdas, and I am the VP of our patient care experience at Veriheal and Verinew.
Incredible. At Vera Holdings as a whole.
Yes,
so we love that.
Yes.
Today we'll be talking more about the cannabis side of things, the Veriheal side.
Yeah.
So let's just launch right into it if you're good with that.
Yeah. I'm so good. I'm excited.
Yes. So I know we talked a couple months ago for like the blog, and you told me kind of the story of how you and Josh Green, who for those listening who don't know who that is, he's a co-founder of the company, are old childhood besties.
Yeah. We grew up in church together, actually.
Incredible. So, can you talk to me a little bit about your upbringing and like specifically like you and Josh's upbringing in the way that like now you guys are like leaders in the cannabis space. Can you talk about your upbringing as it relates to cannabis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a Baptist church, and for people who don't know what the Baptist denomination of Christianity is, it is very much a denomination of rule following, and just having an air of perfecting what it is to like live holy or whatnot. So for me, growing up in like in youth church and things like that, cannabis was a huge thing in my community, especially being Black, in the 90s is when I was growing up, early 2000s, 90s, we were dealing with a lot of the cultural and community ramifications of like the war on drugs and whatnot. So while I kind of had this juxtaposed identity of like my church life that taught me that, things like cannabis were evil, and they weren't things that a Christian, a good Christian person would consume. But I also, in my own community, in my own family, on my dad's side, cannabis was actually a staple of medicine and of leisure and things like that. So it was interesting. It was interesting kind of growing up with that duality where I'm being taught in church scriptures like the Proverbs, which is a book of wisdom that talks about, like strong drink being for someone who's perishing and wine being for people who are miserable and are in poverty, and being like, okay, well, I'm not miserable, I'm not perishing. So there's no reason for me to be consuming kind of mind and mood altering substances because, my mood or mind altering substance is the joy of the Lord. But then also growing up in a household, in my dad's household, because my parents were separated, where cannabis was an instrument that it was almost like food, like you gather, you celebrate around food, so it was an instrument of joy. It was an instrument of celebration. It was an instrument of happiness. So very interesting kind of upbringing there.
That's beautiful. And can I ask, did the church you went to, did they talk about cannabis directly, or was it more like you made inferences from the book of Proverbs?
That's a great question. I made inferences from the book of Proverbs because the Bible doesn't talk about cannabis directly and the use of cannabis, but my church absolutely did. Growing up with 90s hip hop, you had a lot of influencers in that time. The influencers in the Black community were the rappers, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And they were very vocal about their use of cannabis as an enterprise, so it was something that for me, I don't want to speak for all young Black people,
Sure.
But for me, the idea of cannabis was one of, that represented someone who was popular or cool or rich, because people who sold cannabis were, they were the boys on the block with the chains and all the women and things like that. So my church did speak very specifically against that kind of cultural expression of engaging in and celebrating cannabis, for sure.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I never really thought about how cannabis would relate to the church's teaching. So that is a super interesting little gem of wisdom there. I love that. So you talked a lot about your dad. Do you feel comfortable talking about your mom's side of things? How your mom, what you and your mom talked about cannabis?
Oh, absolutely. So my mom is an ordained minister. She doesn't play about anything. She's very much she's very much straight and narrow. But what I will say is my mom has an incredible testimony, we like to say. She has an incredible story of her life pre-faith. And she used to be really strung out on all kinds of drugs, cannabis probably being one of the mildest that she consumed. But most all of her children were born with her being under the influence of crack cocaine and things like that. So for her, she also, we like to say BC, a life before Christ. For her, she was a musician. She was a violinist that toured the nation with a famous jazz musician, a blues musician, Dizzy Gillespie. And so she's lived a lot of lives.
First job right now. That's insane that you're
that was me.
2 positions away from Dizzy Gillespie.
That was me at 19. My dad pulled out this book of jazz and opened up to a picture of my mom standing next to Dizzy Gillespie, and he's making a funny face. And he says that when that picture was shot, my mom was squeezing his butt. So he made a really funny face. So I went home from my dad's house and I was like, why didn't you tell me about this life that you had? And I think for her, it represented kind of the darkness that she felt like she was in, which also included abuse of substances. And she just didn't want that for her children. So she kept that from us until she felt like we were old enough to, kind of know without being influenced in the wrong direction. Yeah.
That's kind of beautiful, honestly. I mean,
it must have
been hard to keep that from your children but to like protect you from kind of the darker sides of things until you're mature enough to handle that is gorgeous. I love. Shout out to your mom.
Shout out to my mom. At 19, I was not happy about it, but being older now and also being a mom, like I totally respect her decision.
Yes, love that. So can you talk to me a little bit about at what point did your views kind of shift around cannabis? You know, did you have that internalized stigma and how did you kind of overcome that?
I 1000% had that internalized stigma. I think the stigma for me personally came from seeing one of my eldest brothers when I was maybe 7 years old. He went to prison for life for murder, and it was kind of wrapped around this gang and drug industry, these relationships that he was in, that after a series of events ended in, him basically having to serve 25 years of his life in prison. And I think when I was younger, I made that resolve that, this is the picture of badness and these are the consequences of badness, and what he was involved in therefore was bad, So as a kid, I was very, very judgmental, even when I would hang out at my dad's house, and, he would have a lot of like karaoke parties with lots of substances around. And I would just be like, look at these people.
Yes, that will never be me.
Never. That will never be. So as I got older, I think, and especially as I was talking about that proverb, that we kind of hinged our idea of what mind-altering substances were for. I would always be like, well, I'm not perishing. I don't need to be put out of my misery. I'm not steeped in poverty. I'm not sad. I was a very happy child, So I was like, there's no reason for me to even need, I was just, I was Baptist. I was better than all of that. But then I became an adult and I was like, oh, misery isn't just end of life.
Yeah, some perishing in other ways.
Exactly, some perishing in other ways. But no, so I think I just, as an adult, I wanted to kind of explore things on my own outside of maybe what I had been taught or what I believed I knew. And that translated into, like in college, me experimenting with cannabis in a recreational way, and just kind of getting to a point where I felt like in order to exist in like this kind of vapid, jaded world, like I needed something to alter my mood, because I was just so wide open spiritually, and I could just see all of the dullness of the world. It's very dramatic. Very dramatic and very poetic kind of experience that I had with cannabis that took me from one extreme where I was like, I will never, I'm a better than Baptist, to me being someone who was very much like dependent on substances to function in the world around me.
Okay. Interesting. And what, can you give me an idea of what age that perception started to shift?
Yeah, probably about age 19 or 20, I would say. Okay. I would say about a year into college, yeah.
Got you. And where did you go to college?
That's a great question. I plead the fifth. Okay. No, I'm kidding. I did some of my studies at a junior college in Arizona called Central Arizona College, and then also at Arizona State University.
Shout out, yes.
Yeah, shout out.
Cool. So, and then after college, I'm trying to gauge, and this does not have to be included because I don't want to reveal if you don't feel comfortable revealing your age, but how long after college, did Josh Green reach out and be like, hey, this is a project we want you to be involved in? When did you make the shift?
I like this question.
Yes.
Yeah. So fast forward maybe 5 or 6 years, I had become a mother. Early on for me, I was maybe 22 when I got pregnant with my daughter, and I was not ready for adult life for real. So I moved to Washington, D.C. to spend some time with my mom. My daughter was ages 5 and 6 when I was there. And my old childhood bestie was living maybe 15 minutes away. And he was working in business to business banking. And we used to just kind of hang out all the time, just have dinner, catch up on life, just hang out. And he's like, listen, you're sitting on your mom's couch. It's like that. Those commercials. So it's like, look at you sitting on the couch.
Doctrine is reading you.
Bill, so my daughter was in first grade at the time, and I was just kind of volunteering at her school, like with the reading program, and it was fulfilling, but it wasn't fulfilling enough. I spent a lot of my day just kind of sitting pondering what I'm going to do with life. And we would have these kind of impromptu lunch or dinner gatherings. And at one point he told me, he's like, hey, a buddy of mine and I are starting this business. And he explained it very like 30,000 foot view, he's like, yeah, we're kind of moving into alternative medicine. And, I think you're very well spoken and you have great emotional intelligence. And we would love for that to be the imprint of our customer service department. So we'd love for you to come help us out like from the ground up. And, Josh, he's super inspiring. Like, I hope he runs for president someday because he's a great wardrobe for it. So I was like, absolutely. Like, I want to do something with my life. I want to get up off this couch, So I was super excited to get started. And I think the reason why he kind of gave me a 30,000 foot view is because he knew kind of what we grew up in and how, our families kind of would have stigmas about alternative medicine as it pertains to medical cannabis. And so me, myself, I hadn't even explored cannabis as actual medicine. I knew that it was like in ancient times. I knew that the Eastern world used it in that way, but I didn't understand the direction that kind of U.S. medicine and things like that was moving. So I just kind of went in blind and was like, oh, we're getting people medical marijuana cards, and Josh is like, yeah, is that okay with you? I mean,
obsessed with that, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm like, I guess so. But it was funny because it was difficult to tell my mom because she was still very much at the time of the mind of like, this is illicit. This is an illicit industry. Is it? And a lot of my childhood friends and family members that also didn't understand the direction that medicine was going at the time would kind of chalk it up to like, well, so you're a drug dealer. You're selling people weed, you're leading people to hell.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was kind of the beginning stages of it for me. So it was a little difficult to navigate my personal convictions because I do believe in cannabis as medicine, and I did then, but I just didn't, I guess, have the tools to articulate and educate those around me about like what shift we were on, like the cusp of, or we were kind of pioneering. So it was a little difficult the first couple of years.
And do you feel like that has gotten easier over time?
Oh yeah, especially with people my age, because I'm pushing 40. I'm 37 years old, proud to admit it because I look good. But
would never have guessed.
But we're transitioning into that age where we're becoming our parents' caregivers. And you have a lot of, and I can go down a rabbit hole on the Food and Drug Administration and how there are suddenly so many cancers that are entering, or that have been entering our world since the 1970s. And so now we're seeing in like firsthand the actual medical benefits of marijuana. We're seeing our parents benefit from it. We're seeing their quality of life increase as a result of it. And so I am experiencing with people in my community, my age group, and even those kind of adults before us, the boomer generation, they're starting to shift from demonizing cannabis to actually wanting to gain an understanding.
Yes. And I'll back that up because I've seen like my best friend from home, shout out Maddie Hepper. She lives in, she lives like on a pasture. Like her grandpa has cows and
love that.
her house like overlooks all the cows. And so
Yeah.
the point of telling you this is that her grandma started using like a tincture. And at first it was like CBD isolate, like broad spectrum or whatever. But she tried the full spectrum, which has like a little bit of THC, and like loves it. And it like, and I'm thinking like, if this rural Pennsylvanian farmer grandma can find the benefits of cannabis, like anyone can, you know what I mean?
Anyone can. And actually, myself and my daughter, we have a skin condition called eczema. And it's a condition of the skin where you have like really dry, flaky skin. It's dry and itchy enough. It's like psoriasis. I think psoriasis is a little more well known, but you know, your skin breaks, it causes sores and lesions and things like that. And there are only a few things that actually can heal those flare-ups rather quickly. We use emu oil, and that typically heals our flare-ups in about a day or two. We use hydrocortisone, which heals our flare-ups overnight, and then full spectrum CBD or cannabis balm heals it within 20 minutes. So to me, like anecdotally, the proof is in the pudding. And it's something that, you know, do I want my daughter to suffer through the night because I have these kind of outdated stigmas about cannabis? Or, you know, do I want to invite something that I believe is a natural God-given thing that he's given us as a tool to heal ourselves, and as a tool to not only heal ourselves physically, but also emotionally and mentally. And there are so many studies that show cannabis's benefits in our bodies, and how we even have cannabis receptors in our brains that, you know, I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer, but I understand where there is a lack of knowledge, and this is a Bible verse, people perish, you know? So, you know, it's something that and
I think
that I fully believe in.
As effective as the mission of like making the process of getting your medical cannabis card more dignified, more respectful, like as big of a part of Veriheal as that mission is, like also the mission of education is huge.
Yes, 1000%.
And so that kind of leads me into my next question is like, you're kind of on the other side of things. Like, whereas I work on the blog, I'm kind of publishing these educational materials, you're overseeing like assembling the team of practitioners who will actually be seeing our patients, who are like patient facing. And so like, how does your experience moving from like your upbringing to destigmifying like internalized preconceived notions, how has your journey kind of impacted your day-to-day life now at this job?
No, that's a great question. You know, I think what helped me the most is like understanding where the inception of cannabis being perpetrated as like an illicit drug came from, you know? And I think for me personally, I had to go back there to like the war on drugs and what was really the purpose behind that. And, you know, in our country, in our Constitution, there's a separation between church and state. But for some reason, when there was a plight to stigmatize cannabis, that separation went out the window, you know, and the government was educating churches on how to teach their community about cannabis. And it was all language that made it illicit and made it, you know, something that was a detriment to your soul as a believer. And I think that kind of unlearning that propaganda helped me firstly to kind of shift myself internally from feeling like I was, you know, inherently wrong for giving people access to marijuana. I think once I was able to shift that internal dialogue in myself, I was able to then open myself up to learn more about the plant and to learn, you know, more about its healing benefits and its medicinal benefits, and even the benefits of someone enjoying it recreationally, you know. Yeah, and I think what also helped was the kind of scientific data and medical expertise of the compassionate practitioners that we work with. They do a phenomenal job at helping destigmatize, and I think I think that's something that really needs to be noted, is that because such a work was done to make cannabis into an illicit drug, I think the same amount of effort has to be put into destigmatizing it. So in the early stages, even some of our practitioners were interested, but they weren't really sure because there just wasn't enough medical information or scientific data for them. And I think the more researched and the more unlearning and learning that we did as a community, we were able to just in a few short years see that stigma shift from sketchy, I don't want to have to go into an office, I don't want to look anyone in the face, to complete my consultation, kind of backdoor type of policies with cannabis certifications. I think that people were able to shift to a more dignified experience, like any other kind of medical consultation.
Yeah. And honestly, is there something that you look for in practitioners? Is there a weed out type question that you're asking these people to make sure that they're the right fit? Sorry.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And I think something that's important for me to note, not that I only choose practitioners that have their own experience with cannabis in their private practice or in their personal lives, but I think it's important to note when I ask them about their experience with cannabis, whether medically or personally, it's a level of enthusiasm that they speak about it with. There is this certain spark of joy or passion that comes over them where they are just excited. It's a revolutionary medicine to them. It's a revolutionary, time for them. And when I hear that spark of joy and that excitement and that passion and that, look, I just want to help people because this helped me. And for so many years, I had shied away from it. I love those types of practitioners because when a patient gets on the line that still might be a little bit nervous about venturing into cannabis for medicine, they can they're not unfamiliar with that reservation, and they can speak to it from a place of authenticity that can really help that patient. That can really help ease their concerns, and things like that.
Yeah. And that is one of my favorite things about Vera Holdings, if you will, both the Veriheal and the Vera News side is that it's really targeting that shame portion.
Yes.
And doing our best to destigmatize and to disrupt the shame that surrounds all alternative medicines, and I think
1,000%.
a large part of that is based on the team of practitioners that you've been assembling for the past however many years. So shout out to yourself.
Don't make me sound that old. No, I'm just kidding. No, but shout out to me.
Yeah. The next on the list to be shouted out is you yourself. So
thank you.
But let's get back into this. I know we kind of you told me a little bit about how or when you told me a little bit about when your perception of cannabis started to shift. I know that you're not a frequent cannabis user now. Is that true?
That's true. I'm no longer a frequent user of cannabis, and not recreationally.
Right. Yes. You might use your topicals but you're no longer getting high on a regular basis. Right.
No. That's correct.
You have a teenage daughter, and now is
I do.
prime time to start talking about these teenage, these issues that confront teenagers, including cannabis. So I kind of want to know
1,000%.
How do you talk to Mariah about cannabis? Wait, if you don't want me to say her name, I can go back.
Totally fine. I have a social media presence and she's named there, so it's fine. how do I talk to my daughter about cannabis? I think for me, like the biggest thing in parenting, especially a child like mine, who is just very inquisitive, very intelligent, and just is full of her own personal convictions, you know, like she's very much a truther. Like she wants to know the truth. She wants to have the facts, and she loves investigating things. So for her, I love to just talk to her, of course, at her age level, just about the truth of things. I talk to her about my experiences. I talk to her about my childhood. I talk to her about, you know, her own childhood experiences and how, at this age, if she were to be interested in something like that, it can impact her cognitive function, you know, and things like that. We use cannabis medicinally, like I talked about, with her eczema and whatnot. So it's not something that she's unfamiliar with, but she is unfamiliar with the recreational use of it. And I love fostering an environment where we can just have open communication and dialogue about what she's hearing at school, what she might be seeing on social media when she's on there. And I think my biggest thing for my child is that I want to separate what's reality from what's this hyper, I don't know the word that I'm trying to find here, but I feel like a lot of the things that are seen on TV or social media or on the internet, since these kids are kind of growing up in such an info, you know, overload age, like I want her to be able to discern the difference between what's reality and what are my expectations for her than what's maybe being promoted on social media or what's being talked about among her peers or what's even acceptable in other households, you know? And so we chat, we have those honest, open dialogues. And I think for her, it serves for the better because she's not going out in the world wet behind the ears and kind of uneducated on what the truth of things are. And she also has anecdotal experiences with marijuana as a healing medicinal agent. So I think just her views on it are not as maybe polluted as others who are raised to believe that it's evil, or others who are raised or even, you know, teenagers who are, you know, already addicted to substances now. So she doesn't have these two extreme views. Her view is very balanced and honest.
And it's probably like, I don't mean to like put words in her mouth or anything, but it's probably like, you know, like I know your mom has lived many lives, but that's just your mom. Like my dad was on the news, and so people would he was like a sports broadcaster, and so people
that's awesome.
On the street would be, thank you. People on the street would be like, how about them Steelers? You know, and it was just like a normal thing for people to just like talk to my dad in public. And I think that like Mariah probably has a similar experience of like talking about cannabis is just a normal thing, or at least I hope she does.
Very much so. Very much so. To her, it's not this taboo kind of illicit drug, but it's also not something that is readily available for her to use at her age. You know, obviously it's not an appropriate age for her to use cannabis in any other way but medicinally.
Right. What is so cool about raising someone with like the perspective that you have is that you're kind of like on the front lines of like shaping part of the next generation, you know? And I've always said that like having a child is like kind of a form of activism, in that you are responsible for like raising a good human with good morals and whatever. And so it's interesting, and it's wonderful that you're like, you can have these open conversations and like kind of maybe she shares that with her friends, like the next time she encounters cannabis at a party or something, you know what I mean? And so
I'm like, what party?
God forbid.
God forbid
like in 5 years or so when she's at a party, you know? As you've kind of watched Mariah grow up in that generation, what have you noticed about like society's perception of cannabis changing from when you were her age to maybe now?
Yeah, I think when I was her age, you know, I grew up in the DARE generation where we wore the like drug abuse resistance education shirts, like a badge of honor. And I was very much a DARE girl. I was like, dare to be drug free. And I will never, ever in my life, you know, like I won't even have wine at communion. Yes. Like, you know what I mean? And where we grew up, I think fear was the tactic that was used. Or do you remember those tobacco commercials that would show these like really intense images of like people's brains rotting or things like that? And I think that
you're not
it's
yourself
a good
when
like
you smoke cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good tactic when you're trying to, I think fear is a good tactic to use when you're trying to like rescue someone from imminent danger. For instance, if a child runs out into the street, you're not going to stop and talk to the child and say, hey, you know, what do you think about, you know what I mean? No, you're going to snatch them up because they're in imminent danger. And so I think what we're seeing in the millennial generation of those who grew up with fear-based education, we're seeing this rebellion of an entire demographic and generation of kids who are deciding like we're doing things extremely different from the way that our parents or society, you know, taught us when we were kids. And I think that can be a very powerful thing. I think that can be super empowering, but also it can be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm in my parenting style, I am more traditional, but I do understand that she's growing up in a different generation than I am. And the messaging that we received in our generation is just not going to work for hers. And so I have to meet her where my non-negotiables and my boundaries are in that space where my non-negotiables and my boundaries kind of meet the society she's growing up in. You know, I had to teach her about things a lot earlier than I wanted to because of the beauty of public school. And, you know, there were just a lot of different things that she was exposed to before maybe as a parent I would want to expose her. But the last thing I want to do is allow her to be exposed to things without the right tools and without the right information. I want her to hear it at home first, you know, so that she can trust what she's hearing at home. So when she's hearing that bullshit out in the streets, she can decipher between, you know, the truth and propaganda.
Love that, honestly. And like, but what you said about truth and propaganda is so relevant because, you know, I am like on the cusp. I'm like a younger millennial, 95, like Gen Z technically started in 97 or whatever.
You're kind of millennial.
Yes. So I'm still like very much, you know, I'm on TikTok.
Yes.
Which we all are, regardless of age. But like, my For You page right now is showing me like all of these like young white people using ashwaganda. And like, I don't know much about ashwaganda. I'd have to Google it. But what I did understand was that it's like kind of this cultural tradition, I think. And I always thought of it as like this really serious drug. And now it's kind of becoming like popularized and like destigmatized. And maybe that's a good thing. Or maybe there's some appropriation going on here, you know?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. But I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it's great that people are opening themselves up to, because I mean, I use ashwagandha tinctures, and this is my first time hearing that it's a drug, but I use ashwagandha tinctures like under my tongue, especially around certain phases of my cycle, let me say, just because I don't want to say too much, but it helps to regulate my mood. It helps with pain and fogginess in my brain and things like that. So I did not know ashwagandha to be a drug, but maybe it's just the way that it's consumed.
What I'm actually thinking of is ayahuasca, and I'm getting the word.
Yes, ayahuasca.
So I probably shouldn't be speaking on it because I don't know much about either ashwagandha or ayahuasca. But the point is that like ashwagandha is all over my For You page, and it probably has different cultural implications that we're not acknowledging, different uses throughout time. And now it's like this trendy thing that a lot of people are talking about. Probably a lot of people are getting benefit from. And I guess you don't really know trust. You should probably talk to maybe your provider before starting it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so,
and I think one of the difficult things though that a lot of people face about like talking to their provider first is the fact that in a lot of ways, historically, Western medicine has not left the door open for kind of Eastern medicinal practices or cultural medicinal practices like ayahuasca. So I understand why people are hesitant to talk to their medical professionals first because they're not professionals in this area. And I think that's a huge thing about Veriheal is that we want compassionate practitioners who understand not even just from a medicinal perspective, but from a cultural perspective, how to respect, people's cultural, approaches to healing. And so, no, I think you bring up a phenomenal point, and we do need more professionals educated on things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's like another great thing about Veriheal, not to like toot our own flute or anything, but like, Cannabis was historically used, we've learned, for at least 2,500 years, And so, and then the war on drugs kind of made it the devil's lettuce or whatever. And so just like our constant mission for deconstructing or like clearing the fog around these things is just something to be celebrated.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point is that there's so much, like, these alternative wellness topics are being, like, are so prevalent on our For You pages that it's so easy to get misinformation. It's so easy to be like, this worked really well for this person. Maybe I should experiment with something that I'm not really that familiar with. And so I do think that, like, the conversation around wellness options like cannabis is opening up, which is great and lovely, and we want to see that stigma disrupted, and we want to have comfortable educational conversations about it, but also it brings in the like, you're not always hearing it from the experts. Sometimes you're hearing it from a white girl in her car. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very true. That's very true. Yeah. No, I love that. I think that is important. I think the white girl in her car is important for a certain niche group of people or a certain demographic of people. Like for me, if I'm seeing like a subject matter expert, I'm all into skincare. So I love seeing the people in the white lab coats calling themselves, they'll say like, oh, dermatologist of 27 years here. I don't know anything about their credentials, but I believe them because they've got a white coat on and they have clear skin. And so I'm going to listen to them. So I think that the white girl in her car works for the people that she works for. But one thing that I love about Veriheal is that the way that we educate, it's casual, but it's also authoritative and extremely, like, it's expert verified and things like that. So as long as the white girl in her car is learning what she's learning from the experts, then I think it's great. But I also agree with you that a lot of misinformation can be shared. And that's kind of what I was alluding to when I was talking about my daughter and what she might see on the internet or what she might hear from her friends, as opposed to knowing the actual truth. And I think it can be extremely dangerous.
Yeah. And like, there is that kind of like big sibling energy that can be really helpful. Like, but I mean, there's pros and cons either way.
For sure.
I'm not trying to clown on the white girl in her car, because like, I'm also,
no, Becky is she's doing her big one.
But or like, there's so many sources out there, and you just have to be discretionary in who you trust and who, you know what I mean?
1,000%. 1,000%.
So kind of pivoting a little, where do you see like the future of cannabis going? Maybe once it's rescheduled, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm like, well, the first future I see is that rescheduling For sure.
Yes.
No, but I do think in the next, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 to 10 years, you have people retiring, lawmakers retiring, and you have new, kind of, I feel like my generation is the generation that's coming up as the lawmakers, the Congress, the senators, the people that are making or that are passing these laws on a state level. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see an acceptance of marijuana medicinally and recreationally. I think that states like Denver and California and Washington will be the norm, nationwide. Obviously with regulation, I think a lot of the reason that these kind of progressive moves take a while, I don't think it's because there's, this old head with traditional views sitting there blocking it. I think what it really is how do we regulate this in a way that we profit from it? And I think that takes some time. And so I really think it's a money game. And when you see that the marijuana industry is a projected $80 billion industry by the year 2050, I think that governments want to get ahead of that and want to, kind of get their hands in there. And yeah, so I definitely see recreational cannabis usage. I see lots more research, especially now that we have AI and things like that. I see a ton more research on cannabis and more people seeing the benefits of it. And I see more cannabis products on the shelves, products that are probably things that people wouldn't think of, like, cannabis beauty items or cannabis for, women's sanitary items and things like that. So I think we'll be heading there very quickly.
Yeah, and we're already seeing it shift from like, oh, this strain has really high THC, gonna get you blasted, to here's a ratio of like CBN to THC. This will help you sleep. Like we're already kind of seeing more catered products rather than just like, here's this strain that'll get you high. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I was just at a conference in Orlando a few months ago, and our doctors were teaching about how cannabis can slow the effects of Alzheimer's disease. They were teaching about how certain strains of cannabis, like you were talking about CBN, can promote hair growth in places, and how other strains can promote hair loss. Like, so for people who, maybe have pesky toe hair, you know what I mean? Like we're starting to see with more research how incredible this plant is and how many different uses and benefits that it has, that it, without much effort even, will begin to destroy those stigmas.
Yes, and I think that rescheduling it is really going to like open up opportunities for more research and for us to find
1,000%.
out even more about this plant, which is
1,000%. Yeah.
Sweet. And so kind of like wrapping up the conversation, thank you so much. Your insights are always so valuable.
Thank you for having me.
Come to the office. That wasn't supposed to be shady.
Oh, it was shade. I was just about to say, don't be acting like it's few and far between, but, we're not here to lie.
Yes, I love to see you anytime we wear, but...
What do they say? I'm here for a good time, not a long time.
Yes, that's your motto in this office. Let's talk about, like, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in like entering this space, who might come from a similar background as you, about talking to their family about these things and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the best advice that I could give is for them to educate themselves, because I think for me in the beginning, working with a cannabis company and having all of these like convictions and stigmas and, voices from family members and friends in my head, I think I could have quieted all the noise if I had have just reached to Google or, a lot more quickly. And I think that really understanding why cannabis is considered illicit, and then understanding cannabis from a medical perspective and a natural perspective and a historic perspective can really help kind of heal those stigmas. And I think for a lot of people, because for me, for instance, like I'm very much, I think my probably the most prominent part of my identity is my faith. And I think a lot of people ask me like, well, how can you reconcile the two? And what I think needs to be addressed in the minds of people like me is that I would really encourage them to suffer intention and information. Like, what is the intention of getting into this field? For me, it was helping people live a better quality of life, you know, and you hear about people who maybe were cannabis patients who couldn't speak, or who couldn't eat, who couldn't hold down food, or who couldn't walk, and using cannabis actually helped heal those issues, you know, and allowed them to live longer. And I think as a believer, if we believe in the healing power of God, then we have to believe in the healing power of the things that he has put in this earth for us to live a great quality of life. So that's what I would tell them.
Right. That is beautiful, honestly.
Thank you.
And it's such an individual experience. Like like cannabis in general, you can really form your own relationship with the plant. And that's kind of what makes it beautiful. And you know, sometimes you really are perishing. And then people say like, I've tried all these things. Cannabis is the only thing that helps, you know?
And there's so many stories like that. Where people have gotten to end of life terminal and they say, well, they're just reaching for solutions. And this one solution actually did improve their quality. So
yeah, love.
You can't argue that.
Thank you again. This has been a lovely conversation.
It has.
We've loved having you, and I'll see you in a bit.
Yeah, I'll see you as soon as I log off of here.
Yes, take it easy. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Do you guys see why Baiyyina is one of the most delightful people to talk to, not only about cannabis, but about everything? The Dizzy Gillespie thing, I will remember for the rest of my life. So thank you, Baiyyina, for coming on and sharing your story. I think it's really important to remember that even those of us who've worked in the cannabis industry come from a background of, you know, coming to terms with the fact that a lot of the stigmas we heard growing up look a lot different than we might have assumed when we were going through that education. And so thank you, Baiyyina, for sharing your story. Thank you to you all for listening, for coming back for another episode of The Green Standard. We'll see you next time. But before you go, if you are wondering if you could benefit from medical cannabis or are interested in getting your med card, Veriheal can help you get answers to any questions you have and link you with a cannabis doctor in your area to start the process of getting your med card. So to get started, visit Veriheal.com. That's Veriheal.com. We'll see you there. See you next time.